when we're on a field trip and
Yes,
we
and then
lose people.
anytime anybody,
Yeah, good.
Oh, you
Yeah.
mean like walkie-talkies for the modern age?
I need to let
yeah,
people
well,
in.
it's like,
Go
it's-
ahead.
Go ahead, let people in.
All right.
We can continue chatting.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
everybody's coming in like it's hot.
Yay!
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Oh, shoot, I better rename myself. They're not gonna know who this is.
Professor Hall. No, go
Right.
ahead. Say as Professor Hall, because then you can be very professional.
I know.
I
but
wasn't sure what to call you.
Yeah, it's El Jefe still, Dave. It's always.
Okay. All right, you took that off of your nameplate there, so.
Sorry, I better fix that. Here we go.
Perfect. Hello. Glad we see some familiar faces. And then Susan, were you with us on Saturday too? You're muted. You have to unmute to talk. So,
Sorry, I wasn't able to be there.
well, we're glad you're with us now.
Yeah, thanks.
I think everybody else who's here, well, except for Debbie, she wasn't able to be there either. We were there, and it was absolutely a fascinating tour of the library.
I bet. Yeah, I live up in the Bay Area, so
Uh, yeah, that's a
a little
fun.
far to go, but I would have loved to. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because I found this book about the Central Library that is about the art and architecture.
Mm.
And when the pictures that our docent, who was, as you know, an Oxy grad, the pictures that he was showing, many of them were like right out of this book. He was
Wow.
pulling out all these pictures, and I'm going, gee, that looks familiar. And oh, that's because I saw it in the in the book. So this was I was even more impressed by that.
That was a
But-
heavy book.
It was a very heavy book.
Yes, really.
And Cindy was saying that they do sell that book in the bookstore at the library. So,
Hmm.
so yeah, but it was really good. So we can go ahead and do we want to do a quick introduction? Let's do a really quick. Oh, okay. Poor Marcy says she's out with a repairman, so she'll be popping in and out. So I'm Nancy Keekley. I graduated in '75, and I've sort of been spearheading the book club discussions that we've been having. And we were going to do this book originally in June of 2020, but then you know what happened. So we're glad that we were finally able to get around to it. Kim, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, Kim Weber Hall, class of '96. Delighted to have everybody here. Yeah, this is 3 years in the making, and I'm looking forward to discussing the library. I'm the president of ALOED, but I just tell everybody else what to do. Everybody else does all the actual real legwork. They just needed somebody to taskmaster them. So that's really just my job. And again, so glad you're all here. Thank you so much. Dave, you're
My name's Dave Alpert, class of '71. I'm a history major, worked with LA Unified for 37 years. I'm also a member of the ALOED board for a long time, and was recently invited to join the 50-year club at Oxy. Also, just a quick item, Nancy and I heard Susan Orlean speak at, I was trying to look at my ticket here, at the Hammer. So that was an interesting opportunity, and she signed my book.
Jack?
Jack Kirkendall. I'm still working at LAUSD. I have 4 more years.
And
And-
Jack unfortunately missed the library tour also because he was on his way home from Japan. So
Yeah, I'm at special ed, and I took most of the special ed department. My wife and I, we went to Japan, and I had lived there, and she's from there, and we kind of were in charge of the tour. And then I got back on Saturday, and then I started teaching summer school on Monday. So
if he glazes over, we'll know why.
yeah, I'm a little sleepy because I still got jet lag.
Mhm.
Jack,
Susan?
in 4 years, are you gonna start doing package tours for? I mean, I think we take the LA Library tour across the pond or something, or across.
We worked really hard.
I bet you did.
Yeah.
And everyone was so grateful. And next time I want to charge money, I think so. But we had a great time.
Mhm.
Okay, Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Christopher, class of 1980. And I haven't been part of ALOED, although I have had a long career in higher education as both a faculty member and an administrator in higher ed. And I just love this book. I also heard Susan Erling speak in San Francisco at a City Arts and Lectures talk. And also I facilitated my own little book group, just my friendly local book club. I facilitated the discussion of this book. So anyway,
Aha.
I would love to-
Good.
this is my opportunity
So
to-
I will be happy to
again.
punt this over to you.
Well, it was a while ago, but
Feel free to jump in with anything you have to say.
sure.
Larry?
I'm Larry Lawrence, class of 58, that's 1958. And I just recently become a member of the 65-year club, trying to stay ahead of Dave. And I had a real thrill in the tour because it was on the site of the school that I had taught at many years. It started there in 1882, so the library, it's a library site. So that was a real exciting thing to find out, see that picture. I saw the picture in the book of the original UCLA normal school. Well, what became UCLA. Great tour.
Great. Sally?
Hi, Sally, Alan, 60, class of 62, and I was music and education major there. And thank you so much for the event on Saturday. It was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you for coming. We thoroughly enjoyed everything.
I wish it was closer. It's the distance that keeps coming up to the college more to participate more, but I'm so glad I had a chance and also for this opportunity.
Well, and you're always welcome to join us by Zoom because we do Zoom all of our book
Oh,
club
okay. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, that's
Yeah,
good.
so no, the distance is no longer an excuse.
Yeah, okay. Got
Okay,
it.
and Kathy, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I was going to ask Sally, where do you live when you said come up to the meetings?
Well, we're in Seal Beach. It really isn't that far, but it's the freeways have become very daunting and everything too. So that's, yeah, it's
Yeah.
not that far, but it's just the
Well, and
time, you know.
I have to tell you that we are planning our next summer book group discussion to be at the Pullman's house in Seal Beach. And so
And
we
that's-
have
that's
really
about-
no excuse for
That's
that.
about mile and a half away. So that's perfect.
Good. Okay, Kathy, you want to give some brief introduction?
Oh, well, I graduated in 64.
Mhm.
I live in Vista, California, which I
Oh,
tried to order something online and the city doesn't exist, they said. Anyway, what else? I was a history major, changed to Spanish literature. Went to USC and got a doctorate there and I've taught for 40 years.
Mm.
And
Great.
retired and joined League of Women Voters.
Welcome. We're glad to have you join us today. And I don't know if Kevin is still with us, but Kevin works in the alumni office and he was the one who coordinated everything last Saturday at the library. You want to there you go. You want to say something quickly about yourself, Kevin?
I'm originally from the East Coast, moved out here in 2016, been at Oxy for a little over a year, and I enjoy working with the various affinity groups like ALOED. I'm going to go back into the the picture mode and work on the chat room and admitting people. So I think we are good to go.
Thank you. And Debbie, are you still here with us? Because you're
Yes, I'm
muted.
back. Sorry, I just went in the other room for a minute. Hi, I'm Debbie Wagner. I'm class of 77. I got my credential in 78, worked for LA Unified, teaching mostly third grade. And then went in, I was a coordinator for 16 years before I retired after 38 years. Still work a little bit part-time and make most of the ALOED events. Most of them.
Thank you, Debbie. And I don't know if Marcy's with us. She said she had a repairman, so if she's not here, Marcy is one of our loyal ALOED people. And he was there on Saturday as well. So anyway, so the library book.
Happened.
So yeah, as Dave mentioned, we went to hear Susan Norleen speak about it well before COVID, and it was quite interesting. And it was also interesting because she was doing a discussion with Roxanne Gay, who now has an affiliation with Oxy. So the two of them were doing a conversation about the book. And I don't remember anything notable that she said about the book, which is probably just because it was a long time ago and my memory isn't great. Do you have any recollections, Dave or Susan, from when you heard her speaking about anything insightful that you want to share with us before we delve into what we think?
I can't think of anything. Like you said, it was 4 years ago, I think. So my memory fades a little bit. So apologize for that.
How about you, Susan?
Yeah, I don't remember anything specific, except I was struck by the sort of just the genuine curiosity that she went into this whole project with, and just how daunting it was to sort of uncover everything that she did about this story. So I just remember being impressed before I had read the book. When I heard her speak, I just remember being impressed by sort of the depth and breadth of what she was undertaking.
So when I was reading the book, I sort of felt like it was 3 different books. I felt like there was one book that was how much she loved libraries and how wonderful libraries were and how important they were. And then there was sort of the book about how libraries work and the history of the specific library and the different departments. And then there was the book about the fire and what happened and the perpetrator of the fire. So it struck me a little, I felt like it was a little bit scattered between those 3. But I loved her writing style. I loved the way she, described things. I especially remember where she was talking about the possible arsonist and living in the valley where they were talking about farming and how the houses popped up like crops in the field. And I mean, her way of describing things was so evocative, I thought.
I was struck by some personal connections that I found in the book. Number one, Susan Orlean was born in Cleveland, and I was born in Cleveland also. The second item that I noticed, Donald Manning was the fire chief at the time of the fire. And my mom and his wife, Rose Manning, taught together and were very good friends. And so the Mannings were over at my mom and dad's house for different things, and my folks were over at their house for different things. So that was kind of an interesting connection. And also, I've been to the library a couple of times. I actually was there in May. There was a special exhibit on Anne Frank. And so my wife and I stopped in over there, and we've been to the library. We don't go very often because it's a distance. But just the fact that I was reading about a place that I'd been doesn't always happen too often.
Very true.
I
Well,
remember.
and go ahead.
I did same thing because I did research there in the mid 60s.
Yes.
In the old before it burned. And yeah, I remember finding parking there, and it was of course a lot easier than now would be. But yeah, and it made me think of when I was a kid growing up in Whittier. There was a children's book club every summer, and going down and giving the summary of the book I'd read and so forth and so on. But I just remember being fascinated going in there. Obviously it was pre-fire, but I just think it was a really interesting place.
Would have been interesting if you had been there on Saturday to see the difference between what it looks like now and what it looked like then. I kept wondering, wishing that I'd spent more time there pre-fire to really have an idea of it. And it was sort of interesting because they were saying that all of the books and reading rooms are on one side of the library, and the other side of the library just has is sort of all administrative, and we didn't get to see any of that part. And they were saying that the basement is where they do all the shipping and the book, because I'm sure that the library, you can request any book from the central library or any other library to be sent to your local library. And that was one of the things I thought was interesting in her book, was how everything has to go through the central library. So if I'm in Culver City, if I request a book that happens to be in Simi Valley, it has to go to the central library first and then is sent to Culver City, which seems like it's quite an operation.
It was certainly convenient during COVID because a lot of the libraries were closed, but you could still go to a local library. You could order anything you wanted from their catalog and then go to a local library. The closest one to me was Westchester, was not open, but Mar Vista was. So it was just another couple of miles. So I thought it was a great service, and I'm intrigued at how efficient they are. I sign up for a book and I get an email and I go pick it up and I drop it off, and it works fine.
I was
Yeah.
fascinated by the guide talking about not just the fire damage, but the water damage to the
Yeah.
books.
Yes, yeah, that was
And
great.
how they froze them, and then they put them in some kind of device that drew the water out. And so each of the books, and there were thousands of them that had water damage. And he said if they had tried to do it any other way, it was the enormity of it was just too much. And I hadn't really thought about the water damage. I mean, I kept thinking, obviously book, paper, they burn, but you know, to put it out, they had to just drench everything. And that was fascinating.
Well, and especially the bit about freezing them. I hadn't realized, I'd read the book like 4 years ago, and I'd forgotten the whole bit about the freezing them and using the local warehouses. And then I thought it was interesting that she said they didn't tell anybody where the books were because they were afraid the arsonist was still going to try to go and burn the book. So I thought that part of it was really fascinating too.
Yeah, it was also interesting. He said that there was a time early on where the library was concerned about people stealing the books, so they branded them.
Yeah.
They literally took a hot iron and
Was that
burned
Loomis?
them.
Wasn't it Loomis?
Loomis,
that
I
did that?
think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was Loomis.
Loomis.
Yeah, yeah. So that was
Well, and
pretty-
of course, now they embed little, chips in them that set off the sensors if you walk out without demagnetizing it.
Yeah.
So it's still an issue.
I started reading just about the book itself, and it talked about present day book banning. Now, was that, yeah, interesting, because I get stuff from friends in Northern California and Oregon, but they're big library people, and they're foaming at the mouth.
Mm.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue, and I know it's an issue that they're very concerned about in all of the libraries. Fortunately, it's not a big deal in most of LA or San Francisco area, although I've been reading about Orange County is having some concerns down there.
I'm
but
waiting for
it's-
San Diego County to, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually, we
go
are
ahead.
a little bit, because I'm planning on going to, I live in Carlsbad, so.
Oh,
The Carlsbad School District is having some controversy.
yes.
Yeah.
I've been to one school board meeting, and I think I'll probably go next month to the school board meeting to be on the freedom of reading side.
They're banning the books there too.
Yes.
Well, there's complaints about.
Right now,
think-
mm.
I think there was a school board, somebody running for the school board. I learned that in the retired teachers luncheon last month. That there was somebody that was gonna be, I can't remember now whether it was a he or she, but wanted to take I don't know, the school in a strange direction. The whole district.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was somebody running for the board, I believe. No, it was a newly appointed board member.
I found really interesting the story of the library itself, the tenacity to
Mhm.
continue and the support it got from the city. And especially Dave was saying some connections. I felt a connection as my family came to Los Angeles quite early and were part of the downtown scene. And my grandmother worked at the store that where the library was located for many years, although I think she was there quite a bit before, because they went there as hamburgers department store, which became May Company. And she worked there, I suspect it was probably, I don't know, in the 1890s. And the library didn't come until 1908, and she was, I think probably that was after she worked there, but nevertheless, I'm sure my family was involved in, I hope they went to the library, but most not.
Well, and I hadn't realized that it was one of the Carnegie libraries. It was funded by the Carnegies too, which is
I-
certainly.
Mhm.
Interesting. Was anybody else annoyed by the arsonist sections of the book? I mean, I really could have done without going into great depth about the guy that they arrested, that they then let go, and his family. And I mean, I guess she sort of had to talk about it because the fire was sort of the tension in the book to make it, I guess, more interesting and dynamic. But I really thought it was unnecessary, and I sort of skimmed those sections of it. Was that just me, or did anybody else feel that way too?
I had a totally different reaction. To me, it was kind of like a whodunit. And
Yeah.
I did not know the story, so I was curious to find out, who did it and why. And obviously she keeps you hanging, which is a good technique for an author.
But
And I thought,
did you feel like you knew who done it at the end? I mean, did you feel, because it seemed to me that she didn't really think that Harry did it.
well, there was some question about whether he did it, and obviously he was never convicted of it. And so, and they don't know if it was ever arson either. There was that question, that was it really arson, or did something self-ignite or something like that? So I was fascinated by
Yeah.
him. I was
thought it
hanging
added to
on
the
every
book.
word.
Yeah, I thought it added to the book, really. That
Well,
details.
her style was really interesting because she kept, like you said, Nancy, it's like 3 different books kind of all going back and forth. And I listened to it this time. I did the audiobook, which is different experience than actually reading it. And yeah, and she was reading it. So it was, the language was very expressive and colorful, and it was just different listening to it. But yeah, definitely, going off on these side stories about all these different people's lives and so on and so forth. And then you come back to the arsonist again. And it was interesting, but different, a little bit different than what I'm used to reading. Yeah.
But when was the fire?
1986.
Yeah.
April 1986, I think.
1986.
Yeah. Wait, I didn't care for the arsonist part either, because I guess because there isn't a definitive answer at the end, and I was comparing it to other fiction books that take not necessarily parallel, but like I was thinking about Eric Larson's books, Devil in the White City,
Yeah.
and where he takes two events or two people in an event, and so they run parallel. But this, like you said, it felt a little bit more disjointed, and I guess because there's no resolution at the end, I also was just kind of like, okay, great, I went down your rabbit hole. But I didn't get to go down where's the rabbit? Like I like answers. So and I guess she never believed it, and I was also doubting the whole time. I was like, I don't know, I doubted it was him. So
Well, I gotta say, it's interesting because the guide, Dave, had pointed out that they were in the midst of beginning renovation because electrical wasn't up to speed, plumbing wasn't up to speed, and the fire alarms went off constantly. So the fact that there was any kind of hint of electrical issues in a library now makes you think, well, it could have been self-started. I mean, it's not impossible to do that, knowing that they were at a point where they're like, we've got to upgrade this place. It's not up to code, and we've got to get this going. So that was an interesting, and then the fire started. And then as he pointed out, the architect was there with librarians, the fire started. They said, don't worry about it because these fire alarms go off all the time. And he said he left his keys and other stuff there and just left. And then, so that was kind of fascinating, part of the tour.
I was drawing some, I was drawing some conclusions to or comparisons to the fire at Notre Dame, because they were doing some renovations there, and there was all kinds of liquid and flammables and stuff. And then all of a sudden there's a fire. And I don't think Notre Dame has been considered to be an arson. I think they considered it as just a self-combusting fire. And so I was drawing some conclusions between the two, both important landmarks in their city. The library probably not as important as Notre Dame, but there was a fire there too.
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. That is a good point. I also thought it was interesting, the part where the firemen were running around the library, not thinking that there was a fire and not seeing anything and saying, no, it's all clear. And they were saying, oh, look a little farther. And then they saw the smoke. I mean, so you can see how it would happen because it's such a huge place and it's such a labyrinth. Makes
And
me
there's
think a little
certainly
bit.
lots of combustible materials too, so.
Made me think a little bit of the Oxy library when they had, the old library and the new library and going through the stacks, and it would be very, very easy to have something get lost somewhere in the Oxy library too. Of course, there aren't as many books in the Oxy library anymore, but that's a whole different conversation. So I'm like Debbie, I listened to the audiobook this time, or at least part of it, because we were in the car driving. I made John listen to it too. And the interesting thing I thought about listening to the audiobook was all the little book descriptions and call numbers that she has at the beginning of each chapter. When I was reading it, I sort of skipped over them pretty much, but listening to them, you can't skip over them. You hear the whole thing. And so I would listen to the titles of the books and then think, okay, so this chapter is going to be about this sort of thing. I thought that was a very clever thing that she did to tie the card catalog into the chapters and what she was talking about.
And we got a glimpse of that because when you ride in the elevator,
Yes.
elevator has all the different cards from
Mhm.
the card catalog plastered on the wall. So
Mhm.
it's kind of a connection there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that feature of the book also. And I remember when my group was talking about it, we sort of compared whether we tried to like look at those and then hang on to the ideas of what those, as you said, as clues to what might be coming in that chapter. I know I sort of didn't pay that much attention up front, read the chapter and then went back and sort of saw, because then I sort of appreciated the cleverness of the, the citations. But anyway, I know people had different approaches to thinking about how those tied in.
It was interesting because I looked at Goodreads and what they had to
Yeah.
say about this book. And there were a couple of people who said, it was so annoying. You could skip over it when you were reading it, but when you were listening to it, you had to listen to the whole thing and how annoying it was. And I thought, no, it wasn't annoying. It was interesting. But then, whatever. So Marcy, Kevin, you just put up something that Marcy said.
Yeah, Marcy was pointing out that, historically, there have been a number of libraries throughout history that were burned, some intentionally as a kind of terrorism. She points out the Spanish burn, the Aztec and Mayan texts. The Nazis destroyed books throughout Europe. And so, that idea of there being an arsonist, as she pointed out, they were concerned about not letting them know where the books were stored because they thought he or she was going to go after them, to do that. But there's something to be said about that terroristic, burning of what is it? He kept talking about knowledge, that all the symbolism in the architecture was about knowledge. Torches,
the light of
passing the
knowledge.
torch. Yes, that you want to tamp that down. You don't want people to advance or question or, and here we are. School boards questioning, a book is going to turn someone from straight to gay. And in fact, because they read a book, it's like, trust me, if your kid is headed that direction, the book had nothing to do with it. Okay.
Well, and for those of us who'd studied at Oxy under Joe Stanchfield, all the torches and the light of literacy. I mean, Stanchfield's big thing was hold high the torch of literacy. So you can't look at all the torches and the sunbeams without paying homage to Joe Stanchfield.
Absolutely. Remember her well.
Unforgettable woman.
Unforgettable too.
I wanted to back up just a minute to the Harry Peake, the accused arsonist. I got a kick out of the fact, and I was looking in my notes, that he was described as the biggest bullshitter in the world. He was quick to fib and fabricate. And these are quotes from what she wrote. And even his own family didn't believe a word he said. And I made a little note to myself, reminds me of George Santos, the New York politician who's all been in trouble. And then also I made a little aside about Donald Trump too, but I don't want to get into too many political fights with anybody, but they seem to be kind of a triumvirate there.
That's a good point, Dave. And it's interesting I had a work colleague who turned out to be a pathological liar. And the thing that you realize is that it is true to them. Right? They honestly believe it. They do not think of themselves as embellishing or stretching the truth. They say whatever they think they have to say at that moment, and it is true to their heart. They absolutely believe it. So this arsonist, accused arsonist, that's what pathological liars do. They don't even think of it as lying. They just lie as we
Yeah.
breathe, so yeah.
And
Well, he
see
was
nothing as-
described as a budding actor, and he liked attention on himself because he admitted, I guess, to some of his friends that he set the fire. I mean, come on, who does that? And he was just constantly looking for the limelight, and so it was just he was an interesting character as far as I was concerned, and I just kind of was tuned into the developments as they were happening.
I thought one of sort of changing the subject away from him, I thought one of the really interesting things that I wrote down was when she was talking about how in Senegal, the polite way of saying someone died is to say his or her library has burned. And then she went on to say our minds and souls contain volumes inscribed by our experiences and emotions. Each individual's consciousness is a collection of memories we've cataloged and stored inside us, a private library of a life lived. If you can take something from that internal collection and share it with one person or with the larger world on the page or in a story recited, it takes on a life of its own. I thought that was just
nice. Yeah.
So that was the other thing. So I'm listening to the audiobook while my husband and I are driving down the coast from Santa Maria, and he made us listen to it at double speed because he thought it was a little slow. But at one point he goes, so what was the point of this book? And she said at the end, she said, this is the reason that I wrote this book. She said, because all the things that are wrong in the world seem conquered by a library's simple unspoken promise. Here I am, please tell me your story. Here is my story, please listen. So I thought that was, my husband didn't buy it, but I thought that was sort of interesting, and sort of the whole role of the libraries. We had read previously, we read as a group, Palaces of the People, which is a book about, in many ways, about libraries and how libraries are changing and how they're becoming more community centers, but they're still centers of bringing people together and sharing information. And so I thought that was sort of, I kept thinking about Palaces of the People as I was reading this, where they were talking about the directions that the libraries.
Yeah, me
Are
too.
heading.
I kept thinking about that one too, Nancy.
Did any,
Was she-
anybody, I thought about, like, I'd love to go down there if it was easier for me to get to, like Saturdays, $1 parking, not a problem. Would have loved to have gone there. Maybe when I was at Oxy, I ended up going to UCLA. I think John had mentioned, John mentioned he'd been down there a couple times. But I also was disheartened by the, people experiencing homelessness, the number of people we physically ran into or had to walk around, or why a library is a haven for them. I don't know. I got a little, I don't know. Maybe bad.
Well, and that is a big issue that all libraries are dealing with right now. And not just right now, but since way before COVID also. And a lot of, they were talking in the book about how the head librarian now is trying to get social services in and mental health services. And I know the LA County libraries do have social workers and mental health people that go to each of the libraries on a certain rotational basis to work with people who are there. But I also know that the librarians at our library spend more time cleaning up human feces from the carpet than they do shelving books. And so it's a real problem. Susan, you were going to say something earlier, were you?
Well, just, I guess, sort of related to that point, I guess it's just more that this book gave me an appreciation for everything that the librarians do, and whether it's, the sort of unappealing tasks that you're referencing, or just, serving as sort of as a haven and as a social, we might all agree that those functions should be provided by other governmental services and not necessarily libraries, but it's the same way that our schools are burdened with such broader, responsibilities. And I just think it obviously sheds light on, issues that we should all be thinking about, is like, if we don't think that's where, you know, homeless folks should be finding shelter, then we need to figure out other ways to
Where?
to solve that. And I guess it just gave me a real appreciation for what libraries and librarians have been doing for so long. I mean, and you know, until there's a book like this, we maybe don't appreciate that enough to sort of see, or until you know, you go and physically visit a library, you don't really appreciate everything that they are doing. So it gave me a real appreciation for librarians.
I picked out a couple of the quotes that she had written about regarding that. She said, every problem society has, the library has. And she said the boundary between libraries and society is very porous. And then finally, she said the library's commitment to being open to all is an overwhelming challenge. And I had never thought of that, but apparently, you know, because they're open and because it's free to come in there, that they deal with just about everything that, you know, society deals with. And that's a huge, huge challenge.
Has
I
there
think
been,
there's a parallel between that and the public schools, is that they have to be open. You know,
yeah,
the Central Library in Pasadena, I spent a lot of time in there the last few years when I was going through the intern program, and my wife would, you know, she would urge me to go to the library to study for tests and so on. And there was a collection of homeless people that were always there. And
Yeah.
I always wondered I see some of them around Pasadena because yeah, I live in Old Pasadena, and I see there's one guy that has these signs, and he has a cart, and he has the, you know, one sign, you know, the world is coming to an end and such a day, and this kind of stuff. And he's quite a character, and he used to hang out in the main section. Now I see him, he tends to hang down at the Starbucks and across from Spooky Restaurant in downtown Pasadena now. So
has there ever been a mass murder shooting at a library like schools? I can't think of any.
I don't think so. I mean, they get bomb threats every once in a while.
Oh, shoot.
But I miss the Central Library, and I miss some of those characters.
Right. You know, another thing I appreciated about her book was just the way we, describing the way we view our historic buildings.
Yes.
And how, you know, in LA, when it was developing, they just knocked things down.
Yep.
You know, there's a whole different attitude in Europe, of course, but
Mhm.
I think it's great that some people had enough insight and vision to see
Yes.
the library as actually a work of art and a very important historical building, and you know, renovated it rather than just knock it down.
Well, in Pasadena, it's part of the old Civic Center. You have
Right.
the library and the city hall, and you have the auditorium and the convention center across the way. Even the YMCA and the YWCA buildings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know that part of Pasadena. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, and that this, you know, I think it's really great that the Central Library was restored. And
Well, and that was one of the interesting things about the tour, was how thoughtfully it was done. How there were so many
Yes.
really precise things that they went into. And the thing that completely blew me away was the thing in the children's library, where before going into there, we were in like the rotunda, and he was saying, look closely at these murals, at the figures in these murals. And then when we went into the children's section, he said, now look at the carpet. And the negative space in the carpet was the outlines of the characters that were in the murals on the wall. I mean, it was just that attention to detail and the really thoughtfulness, like the, you know, the steps, the writing on the steps leading into the library. I mean, there was so much attention to detail that I thought was just phenomenal.
Yeah, I've never
Yeah.
taken a picture of a carpet before in my life. And there I was, like, trying to get like some of the imagery and the background stuff. It was just fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
We had a great guide too. He just hit all the detail, and he was so excited about that, sharing everything too. I think that helped make a really great experience for us.
Yeah, I'm
And
not sure
of
if
course,
you all
our guy
noticed.
was an Oxy alum.
Yeah,
He was-
right.
he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
John and Addie
Son of a
McMillan's
son or son.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
We had 3 people join our tour that weren't with Oxy. Just, I don't know if you noticed that, but you know, me kind of running it, I'm always counting people, and Kim noticed it too. There were like 3 people that just,
They joined because of me. I'm sorry.
oh, it was fine. It was
The
fine. Did they
younger
ask?
of the 3, although the whitest hair of the three is an author, and he recognized me, and then he confirmed that I was who I was when he looked at my name tag. So he just jumped in, and he actually, Richard Rosser is his name. He wrote a book called Piggy Nation, and I had him come to my summer school creative writing classes when I was at Pauley Summer School, and so I take blame for our
Oh, it was fine. It was
but it
fine.
was fun, and they were appreciative of as well of all the information.
And they were wearing, 2 of them were wearing orange shirts. And so I figured they
That
fit right in. They
Yeah.
looked like Oxy people.
Yeah. That worked
One
out.
of the things that I was fascinated with, Nancy, you talked about the different aspects of the book, was her discussion of the different librarians.
Mm.
She went
Mhm.
all the way back to the beginning. There were some women that were librarians very early on, which was kind of radical for the time. And some of them were real characters. Charles Fletcher Loomis is an example. And I thought that was kind of an interesting parallel to the story of the library, was the characters that existed as librarians.
Yes, that's the history buff in you, but I agree that that was one of the really interesting. All 3 of her strands I thought were very interesting and telling. Although I was as I say, I was least interested in the arsonist one, but she had to have that for dramatic impact, I think. So
Yeah. That plaque that, as you pointed out, that is of the fire, names all the firemen that worked on that fire in '86. And it's got to be over 100 people, right? I mean, that list looked extensive. But I was fascinated to learn that it was the most, I'm forgetting the phrasing for it, but the most intense fire in Los Angeles history, or it was something to do with, because of the books and the concentration. And as he pointed out, architecturally, it's cement. So the building itself didn't burn. It was just what was inside that got consumed. But that it took that many different fire departments to put that thing out, and that plaque, as you walk in, I'm not sure which entrance that is, off of Flower Street, I believe, because it's right where the park, the McGuire Park.
How much of the library burned?
What do you all recall him saying? What was it?
I
It was
don't,
only-
I'm so bad with numbers. He gave the number of books that they lost.
Oh.
Yeah, they lost
And-
400,000
did-
books out of about 2
There's a
million.
lot of, they didn't, I'm sorry, what was the number?
He said there was 20%, I believe, so it was 400,000. That would be out of 2 million books. He never said how many books there were, but he said 20%.
And some of the things weren't just books, they had the biggest selection of patents, all of the patents that had ever been issued, and those were all gone. And so there were things that were sort of irreplaceable, but it wasn't like, because the building was concrete, it wasn't like the building itself did a lot of burning.
It's the
Right, I mean,
material.
was there even any structure, was there structural damage?
I don't recall him saying they had to do
No,
anything
it's
other
in
than,
there. He's in it.
yeah, I don't think so.
What did you think about the part where she burned a book?
That was interesting. Was she just wanted to see what it was like, what it looked like, what it smelled like, how fast it would burn up? I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I can't imagine thinking of doing that. Susan, you want to?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought it was a little provocative. I mean, it felt a little bit like because again, I'm a big admirer. I really loved this book, and I loved, hearing her speak. So I don't mean this as a generic criticism, but that sort of felt like a sort of funny, provocative.
It's kind of odd. Yeah, just kind of odd. Did she want to, I don't know, is she trying to recreate an experience? I don't.
Or did she just want to bring in Fahrenheit 451 because
Right,
it needed to be?
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting because apparently that's what the temperature that paper burns is 451 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
Right.
Fire started in the fiction section, and they said A to L was mostly destroyed. And the author of Fahrenheit 451 had his books destroyed, I think, in the fire.
Yeah.
Right.
it's-
Yeah.
Well, Bradbury is starts with a B, so it's between A and L.
Right.
There you
Right.
go.
That's B is one of, half a dozen letters between A and L.
Well, it's interesting, Nancy.
I don't like the idea of even attempting to burn a book.
Yeah, but it's interesting because libraries at a certain point do get rid of books, where they're either too old or they're textbooks or technical books or something, and they are either thrown out or something. So if she had targeted, and the reason I know this is that I had a building project years ago where I used spines of books to create a bookcase like in the background that looks like books, but it's literally just the spines of the books. And I went to a library and I said, is it okay? I'm destroying these. And they were like, it's fine because we're going to throw these out. We're not, there's nothing to do.
Yeah,
That's-
the libraries
Dates.
have giveaways, or you can buy old books and things too sometimes. but-
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I'm involved in the Friends of the Library group at our Culver City Library, and people donate books. And a lot of the books that are donated are, horrible. I mean, they're mildewy and they're falling apart, and we have to get rid of them because there are thousands of them. And
Mhm.
so we have to we recycle them. We get a recycling bin from the city, but we have to be very careful about how we dispose of them, because one time somebody saw us putting books in the recycling bin and just went totally ballistic because they was, they're throwing away books and this is terrible. And
Yeah.
but yeah, there are just so many of them that you have to do it, and it hurts. I mean, it's hard to throw away a book just like it would be hard to burn a book. But yeah, there are more books than we can do than we can have room for.
Yeah. Are you
Well, I would
familiar
imagine
with?
they also replace books that are just
Right.
gotten old and they
Mhm.
just get newer copies too, or maybe newer editions, right?
Yeah.
Are
Okay,
you-
Kevin.
Are you familiar with it's a digital service called JSTOR that a lot of libraries have? So it's interesting. I was working with when I was living in New York. It's started by a Princeton grad who was on the board of a particular college, and he was touring the basement of the library, and he was saying, what is all of this? And it was just piles and piles of stuff. They said, these are all the various academic journals that we get. And as they were trying to raise money for the library, he was like, we got to be able to digitize these. So that's how JSTOR started, by recognizing at a certain point, you need the space in a library. And so if you can digitize the academic journals, not only then are they searchable versus having to go through page by page to try to find it. Now you can just put in, but that whole project of digitizing pages, back in the day, when pages were, this big because, paper was expensive. So they even go back and they made a deal with the journals that they wouldn't do them. They'd wait a year. So they never kind of broke into subscription stuff. They always allow people to do that. But that's an interesting thing that libraries digitizing things now for.
Well, and they actually talked about the digitizing of pictures, and the woman who spent her days, going through pictures and digitizing them and then tagging it with, ways that they would be able to retrieve it and saying, if there's a lawn, they put it under lawns because people would be looking for that. I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah.
Of course, they used to do microfilm.
Yes, I was thinking about that. Yeah.
Microfiche, right? Was that what it was called?
Microfiche.
They did both. There was
Mm.
microfilm and microfiche, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was interested in her discussion of Overdrive and the company that provides digital books, because that seems to be the way libraries are going. And there's a question, will libraries need to physically exist in the future because people can get so many things digitally? But I've used Overdrive. I'm not a particularly strong person on reading books on my computer. I do like the old-fashioned open up the book and the cover and everything like that. But she did discuss how that started, and that was fascinating.
And that Overdrive is my very favorite thing, and I use Libby, which is the new version of Overdrive, religiously. I mean, I think it's the greatest thing ever. And again, during COVID, it was particularly fabulous because everything was right there at your fingertips. So I love that a lot, and I prefer reading books digitally.
Yeah, I'm not a total Luddite. I know some of you probably think I am, but I have occasionally, if a book wasn't available in a hard copy, then I have checked it out and read it digitally, and it was fine.
So one of the ways that we're encouraged as professors, every year we're asked to try and make our syllabus like zero cost. And one of the ways to do that is to either, fill our syllabus with journals that students can access, or some kind of e-reader version that's less expensive than the printed version. So, and my students all know how. Like, I would say that when I first started at Long Beach, which is now, if you can believe it, going to be 8 or 9 years ago, that I had half and half, but it's probably 75 to 80% prefer reading the e-version. And it's usually my returning more mature students, second time job students that want the hard copy, that physically need it to hold as far as a factor for the digital.
Well, if you remember lugging very heavy books up the hill at Oxy, it's much nicer to have it just, on your pad or on your computer.
I was just sharing an experience with my younger son the other day. We were talking about different groups of people that we've interacted with. And I said, well, I knew about this one group. We were talking about assumptions we make about groups. And then I find myself, the universe kind of works this way. When you make an assumption about somebody, you cross paths with somebody from that group, and then your mind, because you have a real personal experience with them. And that happened at Oxy while I was waiting to get my books in line at the bookstore, sandwiched between two individuals from a specific group that I had previously had some opinions about and had since changed, because I had to stand in line with them for an hour waiting for our books.
So there are advantages to having real books. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely.
And they keep bookstores busy, because we do not want to lose bookstores. But this is one reason that libraries are working so hard to make a niche for themselves in other areas. That's why they're doing so much with computers and with community. Like the LA County Library is now loaning out tools for people to do home improvement. And I know LA City Library is loaning out ukuleles. And, so they're really working on making things work, for making a place for themselves as a real community resource, so that when there aren't as many books, or like the Oxy Library, when we were there for reunion weekend and went through the Oxy Library, it was sort of like, okay, so where are the books? But they're finding another niche for themselves. We found instead the e-gaming room.
Yes. I was fascinated by the Central Library's focus. I shouldn't say focus, but that they have targeted immigrant and immigrant children, and that that whole reading room was of children's books in different languages, so that you could bring your child down there and there would be something. And Kim, I think you pointed out that there was a whole thing for holidays. There was just a bunch of shelves that were just in different languages, different holidays, and kind of books about them. And I thought that was really good. And the nice bathroom, as the information person pointed out, was in a section that was for new immigrants. And it was all about, books in various languages, so you could kind of come and work on your skills and stuff. So I was kind of kudos to the Central Library for targeting that demographic that, needs, particularly for their children. Yeah.
And that's certainly true of the LA County Library also. I don't know if I mentioned, I'm on the LA County Library Commission. And one of their big goals is to have something for everybody and to really bring people in. And they have a whole section on, how to be on citizenship, how to become a citizen. And they are, the whole tax form things. And they're really trying to reach out. And during the pandemic, they were having mobile hotspots driving around the city, so that people who didn't have access to the internet could have access. And they loan out laptops and they loan out hotspots. And so they're really trying to reach out to the community. They also were having bookmobiles going around and doing story times at daycare centers, figuring they wanted to really reach out to the youngest kids that weren't getting the help that they needed.
Yeah.
So they're trying to fill a need, and that's a good thing.
I wondered if anybody noticed, because it bothered me, there was no table of contents in that book. There was no index. There were no chapter titles or footnotes. And as a historian, I mostly deal in nonfiction. Almost every single book that I've ever read had all of those items. Hers had none of them. She did have a short section called Notes on Sources, where she talked about some of the sources that she drew from. But did anybody notice that, or did anybody bothered by that, or was I the only weirdo?
Well, instead of having chapter titles, she had the book call,
Right.
little book
Right.
descriptions. And I think that was what she was doing instead of chapter titles. But no, I always ignore notes, and so I didn't miss it. I know you're good about that.
This one also didn't, I guess I did equate it something similar to Eric Larson. Like it was definitely nonfiction, but it's her nonfiction of her. I didn't feel like it needed to be sourced, so to speak. I guess I wasn't ever questioning, like, where did you get that information, or who said that, or how do you know that? Because I didn't feel like she was presenting it as fact. Like, to me, can I say this, that nonfiction is different from fact? I don't know. I'm getting into semantics, but I'm with you, Dave, when I read something that needs to be sourced versus I guess I didn't feel like that needed to be sourced, maybe, but no table of contents, no chapter. Yeah, the chapter title headings, I think she was trying to be cute, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know there wasn't no table of contents. My digital version has a table of contents.
Really? Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
mine had the number of chapters, but there weren't any chapter titles, because I was
There were
like,
no chapter
there were no
titles.
chapter heads.
but they were
'Cause I
numbered.
always look at that first before I read a book. I look at the table of contents and the, the book jacket and all that stuff before I start reading. So yeah, I noticed that. But since I was listening to it, she gave those references at the beginning of each chapter. So I figured that was the source material for each chapter, right?
Yep, that's what no, they were just that was just instead of chapter titles, I think, just to sort of give you a sense of what it
Okay.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find as I'm reading, and it may be just the history background, but sometimes there'll be a footnote and I'm curious and I'll go look and say, oh, that's where it came from. And sometimes I'll even trace down the source to find where it actually started. And
Well, so
like I
did you-
said, I might be strange that way, but that's
But
okay.
was there anything in this book that you wanted to do that with, that you felt frustrated because you couldn't?
No, I was, totally bought into her research and everything else. And so I wasn't questioning anything that she presented. So that wasn't an issue. I was just, I like to see the footnotes just so I can refer to them, I think is about the only reason.
Okay, I don't know, is the gardener next door to me is the noise of that gardener bothering anybody, or am I the only one who's hearing it?
Fine.
Okay,
Can't hear it.
What noise? I can't hear it.
good.
Right.
Glad to hear. Okay, so, but we're actually sort of running out of time here. So are there any last minute things or point that anybody wants to say, or points that anybody?
Well, one thing is there's parts of the country where public libraries are under attack, just like the public schools.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They're taking books out of school libraries, and I heard there in Oklahoma, they were debating in a county just to shut down all the libraries over it because there were so many arguments over books.
Yeah, I heard that. That reminded me of that. The book we read in Maryland where they didn't want to integrate the swimming pools, so they just closed them all. So they don't want to deal with the books. They're just going to close all the
Oh, we could
libraries.
Go back to the
I
dark
think-
ages.
I think public libraries are part of the idea of being citizens and having civic space.
Yes.
Yes.
Democracy.
Yes, and
Freedom,
democracy.
freedom of thought, freedom of thought. And
Well, that's under attack. You're mentioning about libraries being burned and the Spanish burning Aztec and Mayan texts and the Nazis destroying books. I was going to say, how about Ron DeSantis?
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. my thoughts.
We're back to that again, obviously, so.
Well,
Right.
it's coming around, you know, it's like, the other night I caught, the courtroom scene from Inherit the Wind, and I said, geez, that's topical.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But what I also find fascinating is that if you wanted to find a quicker way to get a kid to read a book,
Yes.
tell them
Yeah.
not to read
Tell
it.
them not
And it's
to.
just
Oh,
so
that- yeah,
fascinating. It's
exactly.
It's like, don't think of a
understand.
pink elephant, right?
Yeah, you know, if you just let it go, 80% of the kids would never touch it. But as soon as you tell them you can't read this book, it's like, let me get it, let me read it. And so I'm like, okay, if that's what
There's
you got-
there's a organization called StoryCorps. Anybody familiar with that? They
Mhm.
they're basically doing oral histories.
Right.
And I think they're tied in with libraries. And I actually, they have the oral histories, but they also turn them into 2.5 or 3 minute animations.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And I have used those as the basis for lessons. And they focus on minority and poor people and working class folks and their stories. And they've got quite a collection now. I don't know if they're tied in directly with any, with any library organization, but I know that they're a wonderful resource.
They are. There's a wonderful one that if I'm thinking of the same thing, Jack, that is a little 2 or 3 minute cartoon about some now grown man saying he would go to the library and he would steal these books. And then
Yes,
the library caught him, and instead of the librarian caught him, and instead of punishing him, she gave him more books.
yes, he's a judge.
Okay.
He's a retired judge, but it was Arkansas, and he didn't want his buddies to know he was reading, so he would steal the book. The librarian saw him steal it, but realized that why he did it. And when he brought it back, there was another book by the same author, and that's because the librarian would drive over to Memphis, Tennessee, and get books by that author. And then about 15 years later, when he went back to a reunion, he ran into the librarian, and she told him what, by that point he was, already, he was an accomplished lawyer, and she said, well, gee, I'm glad to see that. And I noticed that you were reading. And then she told him what she had been doing. I used that as a lesson. We had to do lessons oriented towards African Americans. And I'm not the most credible spokesman for the African American experience. So what I would do is I would take a StoryCorps animated lesson. I did that one. I did one about the man who became an astronaut and was killed on the Challenger.
Ronald Nair. Yeah. Ronald.
Yes, and about how he went to a library in the white part of town, in this little Jim Crow town, South Carolina, and the librarian was going to throw him out, and he said, if he doesn't leave, and he said, I'll wait. I'm going to call the police, and he says, I'll wait. And the police came, and his mother came, and and it was just not long after Emmett Hill,
Mhm.
and the police told the librarian, well, lady, why don't you let him check the book out?
Yeah.
So those stories are really relatable, and they're very useful.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've had a couple of people who had to leave, so I think we're going to have to wind this up now. So thank you very much for joining us. I don't know if Susan Christopher is on my email list. I would have asked her before she vanished. If Kathy, if you want more information about the books that we read, I can add you to my email list, and we can give you
Super.
So if Kevin
I
has
can-
your email
Yeah,
address, you can
I've got
send it on.
email information, so I'll be able to do that.
Thank you, Kevin.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and thank everybody for coming and enjoyed chatting about the book, and we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks, everybody.
facilitating.
Thank
See
you,
you
Nancy.
next
Great
time.
job.
take care, everybody.
All right.
Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot. Bye.
Happy July 4th.
Yes.
Oh, that too, yes. And thank you, Marcy.